fortunate to be joined by a number of the relatives of the first 4 Kerry TDs, and we now invite a representative of the 4 families to say a few words on behalf of their ancestors. Firstly, would you please welcome, representing the first TD for North Kerry, Dr. James Crowley, his granddaughter Clem O'Keefe.
I would just like to say thank you to Kerry County Council, Owen and Caroline, Norma and everybody involved in today's exhibition and proceedings. It's absolutely lovely and I think it's about time. And I'm here to speak about my own grandfather, but there are other grandchildren and great-grandchildren here, and he has great-great-grandchildren. Isn't that correct, Michael? Yeah, so a number of them at this stage, so it's wonderful to know that the baton will be passed on to the family. So we're gathered here today to commemorate the men who represented Kerry in the first Dáil. I'm very proud that my grandfather was one of those men. I was thinking about what I would say about him in the short time I had, to give you a sense of the kind of man he was. I never knew him, as he was dead before I was born, so I only have a few documents relating to him, some photographs and stories that my family and my father have told me about him. In the Belfast jail log, he was known by the Irish translation of his name, Seamus O'Toole, but most people knew him as James Crowley, or to friends and family, Jim. He came from a fairly privileged background. He was educated in Trinity College. He won 3 gold and 1 silver medal for outstanding achievement in his studies. And he became an extremely popular vet, known especially for his natural ability to work with horses, no matter how wild or how much in pain they were. My father told me that he called to a British Army barracks once in Tralee, where there was a large white stallion that no one was able to get near. He was so wild. He was asked to put the animal down, as it was no use to anyone, but instead he made an arrangement and agreed to take the horse. Somehow he managed to tame it, and it wasn't long before he was riding it to his call-outs. This is how he first met my grandmother, Clementine Burson, and he was called out to her home to tend a sick animal. And when he rode up on this magnificent white stallion, well, you can imagine, she was instantly besotted. She was only about 17 or 18, but they married when she was very young, and the rest is history, real history. Jim was arrested when he read what he called the manifesto in public in Listowel in 1918. He was charged and convicted of sedition and ended up in Belfast jail. But the story of how he ended up reading the proclamation in the first place is typical of the kind of man he was. My father told me that there was a meeting to decide who would read it, and one brave man immediately volunteered to do so. But Jim refused, and he said they all should put their names in a hat to make it a fair test for everybody. Jim wrote on his own piece of paper, "Cheerful Idiot." And he was the person drawing out the names, and he drew out his own name. He was a key figure involved in the Belfast siege in charge of a wing of the prison, and was a member of a group of men including Fionnán Lynch, Austin Stack, Ernest Blythe and Kevin O'Higgins, and they met with the Bishop of Down and Connor, Joseph McRory, who subsequently became a cardinal in relation to the conditions they were kept in. The conditions caused the siege in the first place, and my grandfather became very, very ill. He was subsequently released from prison on grounds of ill health, but of course as soon as he recovered enough, he went right back to his intelligence work. Jim risked his life on numerous occasions during this time. In 1920 he contravened the curfew night after night, and even in broad daylight, to meet with RIC men in the Listowel to instigate and document the first of the RIC's revolt there. He drew up a document relating to this, which he took to Dublin, and it was published finally in the Freeman's Journal. This was a turning point in the War of Independence, and it quickly spread countrywide. Despite the sacrifices he made, the long-lasting negative impact of several stints in jail on his health, his business, and of course his family — he had 3 small children at this point — and the long service to his country in the Dáil, Jim never received a pension. He was very nearly completely written out of all the history books. There was little or no reference to him in many recent historical documents, but today I'm very proud to be here with my family members to celebrate this inspirational and truly brave and selfless man in the service of his country. I would like to invite you all here today to an unveiling of a plaque to mark Jim Crowley's birthplace in Lower William Street in Listowel on Saturday the 22nd of December at 3 p.m. and a presentation afterwards in the Shanachie Centre of photographs and oral documents marking Jim's life and times, and that of his wife Clementine, because it's very important to remember we are celebrating the men here today, but they're also all the women that were there supporting those men in those days who were just as brave. There's one person missing here today from our family that I would like to mention, my cousin Clementine Farr. Unfortunately, Clementine died just a few years ago, but it was her who passed copies of all these documents to me and who inspired me to take up the baton for Jim and his wife Clementine Burson, who in her own right was an extremely brave activist and a tremendous support to Jim. I think my cousin Clementine will be very proud of what's happening here today.
Thank you, Clem. And now to represent the family of Piers Beasley, the first ever TD for East Kerry, would you please welcome his cousin, John Beasley.
A lovely story, Clem. It'll be hard to follow that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting us here today to honour these great men. My name is John Beasley. Many of you may not be familiar with Piers Beasley, and quite a few people have approached me during the week and asked me about him. I think it's very apt that Piers Beasley's involvement in the first Dáil is displayed here in the library, surrounded by books. He loved books and would like nothing better than to be surrounded by them, and hopefully the people will take the time to read his story and maybe explore it further. They will be pleasantly surprised at what they find. For instance, how does an Englishman at the first Dáil find himself seconding the Declaration of Independence and then reading the democratic programme in Irish, despite the fact it was written in English, and doing so in what was described as a soft Kerry accent? In truth, he wasn't seen as an Englishman. You see, Piers Beasley's father, Patrick, grew up in their family farm in Haddo in Killarney. A couple of years before Piers was born, they were evicted from the farm by Lord Headley, and some of the family stayed in the area, but Patrick emigrated to England, where Piers was born. He grew up with a great love of the Irish language, and his early ambition was to write great books and be a patriot. He spent his summers in Kerry with his uncle, Father James Beasley, a priest in a Gaeltacht area, and he was able to perfect the Irish language, albeit with a strong Kerry accent. He had a great love of the Irish language, and this lasted him to his dying day. At every opportunity, he strived to promote the language, from writing most of his books and plays in Irish to the establishment of an Fána, which his badge is still worn today, as Tommy has one on his head. The photograph here of him is pre-1916. I know this because after 1916 he would have proudly been wearing the Fána on his lapel. Piers Beasley from an early age had a grand plan, but nowhere in that plan involved being a politician. But this is precisely where he found himself 100 years ago. He had fought alongside Fionnán Lynch at the Four Courts in the Easter Rising. He had family in Killarney. He was a fluent Irish speaker, and he was a wanted man. So he had all the attributes of a good East Kerry politician. He was elected unopposed, and I would imagine he got some degree of satisfaction in an evicted tenant farmer's grandson returning to Killarney as a Sinn Féin MP. He was elected unopposed in 3 general elections, an honour held by only one other. No doubt the politicians in the room are less like the sound of that term, elected unopposed. Just imagine no canvassing, no tallies, no nail-biting recounts. But I suppose these men and women faced other challenges. Piers Beasley spent much of his time on the run. He was captured 3 times, and each time he escaped. He escaped from Mountjoy, and the last escape was from strange ways in Manchester along with Austin Stack. On one of his escapes, he left a note in his cell apologising. He did not contest the 4th general election in 1923. As he said himself, he had no earthly desire to be a politician. He instead resigned from the army and returned to writing and continued to promote the Irish language until his death in 1965. To conclude, I would like a quote from Pierce Beasley himself on their achievements at that time, and I quote, "A small band of men and women working together bravely and unselfishly achieved more in 8 years from any body of patriots in any generation since the English conquest of Ireland to restore our political freedom and make Ireland of our dreams possible." Remarkable.
Thank you, John. Next, representing the family of Austin Stack, TD for West Kerry, his grandnephew Eddie Barrett, please.
How does one follow those two super pieces? I'm absolutely honoured to be here today, representing my family. Two of my siblings are on the floor there, Austin and Nan, and it's a super emotional day for all the families. And I'd like to just say something at the outset. I think actually the four families, we had a little photographic get together here a couple of weeks ago, and whereas I'd have known faces, I had never physically met most of the people involved before, and my heart goes out to Kerry County Council and Myra and her team, Owen and the girls, for putting this together today. It's just a fantastic idea. Not only the 100-year element of all this, but the coming together of families that might have been displaced politically over generations as well. I think that's one of the fantastic things that's coming out of today. So, as I said to John Joe as well, I know Norma will be very disappointed that she's not here as a result of a little accident that she had, because she has a great sense of political history as well, and is so well read in that area. Owen, Caroline, Kate, etc., who've done fantastic work on this. As I said, we're now a band of brothers, ye three, and us families wise. It's a super thing. The election in 1918 was remarkable, in as much as you had such a number of seats uncontested in the country at a time of huge turmoil. So many of the people actually running for those seats were themselves incarcerated during the period concerned. It showed a fantastic maturity, I think, of the Irish nation as it was emerging at that particular stage, that they could organise an election where so many existing parliamentarians stood aside, saw the writing on the wall, as those of us that might be a little bit more cynical might say, but actually did it for the good of the nation that was emerging at that particular stage. A man said hello to me just behind there today, and he was saying, was he, he was tying up our side of the family where Austin Stack and his father was concerned. We need to do a little bit of work on where William Moore Stack and his parish, where he came from in North Kerry, because it falls on us at this stage to investigate further and to dig deeper into our own family ties. There's a Stack outing that occurs every couple of years in the Stole, which we've attended, but we need to really embrace the family as it is, as should happen in relation to the Crowley, Beasley and Lynch families at this particular stage, where we should have that element of extra pride in what and who they were and what they were. William Moore Stack, I was taught when I was a young fellow, was a Fenian. And the Fenian movement was largely disastrous, because from the early days they were picked up, they were jailed, they were hung, they were quartered, they were tortured, and it wasn't a very successful time, but it was the seed that probably was laid for the 1916 Rising afterwards. And my great-grandfather, our great-grandfather, was part of that movement, and finished up probably a broken man out of it, up to when he came in as an apprentice solicitor to Clark to Tralee, when apparently he was 14 and a half years of age, and he had a large family after that. married twice, lost one of his first wife in childbirth, and by the time he died in 1899, most of his family had also emigrated to the States, which was a very common regarding situation in Ireland at that time. He himself was jailed for a number of years in Millbank and Woking Prison in England, and he was held in remand at one stage for a year here as well, I think in the 1870s. And so his life was not, it wasn't a thrilling experience by any means, but he managed in the meantime to have 8 children, and managed to survive with his family living in Ballymullen, and where the Ellen Court apartments over there opposite Horns. That's where I think he lived in his latter years. He was also a founder of the GA in Kerry, so he instilled a tremendous passion for the Ghana, as we call it, into his family. And even those that went to America, they still had that passion. They were there for economic reasons more so than anything else. Stack's father was allegedly excommunicated by the church in St. John's from the pulpit. He attended the Dominican church the rest of his days, never lost his sense of religion, and by all accounts the Dominicans took care of his funeral in 1899 when he died, so that little row was still in the background somewhere with the regular church, if you like. Not unusual in today's world either. So that was what Stack was born out of. So he was a rebel from the beginning. He was 20 years old when his dad died, and over actually something that you raised about the jailbreak from Strangeways. When that happened, apparently they had created havoc during the period of this election in 1918. A huge number, including a number from Kerry, were in Crumlin Road jail. How ironic that is. And they were burning the jail down, basically, when the election was being held here at the same time. So the coercion was there from within and without, in as much as the battle was being fought inside and outside. And the tactic of hunger striking, which is a very peaceful way of rebellion, was very much at the forefront, both in Crumlin Road over that period and in numerous times where Stack was concerned in his lifetime. It seemed to be his weapon of choice. I'm not sure whether he ever fired a shot. We've no record in the family of he having done so. Certainly his brother did, Jim, who came over across the Atlantic on 2 occasions during the War of Independence and subsequently during the Civil War, and was jailed and was sentenced to death just as Stack had been in 1916. So there was that side of the family. Certainly Jim was probably the gunman of the family, whereas Stack was the politician ever so. And what I'm giving is my own opinion. It's not everybody's opinion, so we can only work from what we have. He was a very proud abstentionist, and that word has been used very frequently in today's world, when elected MPs are being asked to consider taking an oath of allegiance to a foreign queen or parliament at this particular stage. I would be of the view today, just as much as 100 years ago, that abstentionism worked very well. It's a tremendous tool, just as hunger striking was. It's a peaceful tool of politics, and it certainly, I think it's working at the moment too. And I would just remind our politicians who, on one hand, I would like to state absolutely that I think Varadkar and Coveney are doing a fantastic job on behalf of the country at the moment in relation to the backstop, that they should lean off a little bit on this idea that abstentionism should be valued. It's a great tool of politics, and I would call on I look forward. I look down on some very great Fianna Fáil politicians here, including our last mayor here today, and maybe Micheál Martin should go back and look at his history too, you know, in relation to abstention. It shouldn't be a situation where we're being told now that it's all right to take notes to Westminster, the Queen, or whatever. We should look back on these guys and what they stood for, and why we should stand for that all the way through until we succeed in getting unity in this country. Anyway, that's my little bit of spillage. I would like to say just on the other thing, on the other side of it, as I said, most of his family went away, New York, Philadelphia, etc. We had a very famous aunt who worked 60 years in the one job in Philadelphia, and she eventually came back to Kerry, where she's buried now, over in the new graveyard with William Moore Stack and his wives and a number of his children that didn't survive. And I think that maybe looking down at Moira here, there's probably a great case to be made, and I know Norm was very hot on this one as well, that Tralee is an absolute hotbed of history, where the GAA is concerned, where political history is concerned, and the joining together of all of us that would have seen us drift off in different directions politically. We have a fantastic mine of history in this town. I would call on Myra Morell to set something in train here now, which is basically we have towns like Tralee, Listowel, Killarney with equal historical connections to both the Fenians, the Rising, etc., etc. Why not have that the houses of where our politicians, our sports people, etc., etc., should they not all have a little dedication on them? And we could have the same thing happening in the Listowel, Dingle, Killarney. There are many famous people that have come out of this county that we should be very proud of, and there should actually be a sort of a tourism journey available for people coming to Kerry, where they can actually visit the places that these people were born in and they conducted their lives. I think if nothing else came out of this, and I would hate that the 100th anniversary would be just the end of this thing, but I would say you have a fantastic department within Kerry County Council at the present time. What about having a marker on every important house and location in Kerry that people came out of? Because we should never forget them, because they are the actual foundation stone of our future full republic when we get there in the end. I don't think there's much more to say about Stack, except that he was a handy footballer in the state. He won his All-Ireland medal. Kieran, my cousin here, was telling me today that another Austin Stack in the family has the responsibility for looking after that medal. And I say responsibility, make sure it never drifts out of the family. It's one of those fantastic things in Kerry in particular. Okay, there's a lot of them in Kerry, but it's a very proud tradition. The connection between the GAA, for instance, and the Irish state and Irish republicanism is very strong there too, and we should never forget about it. One other thing where Stack was concerned is he had a deep love of Irish, and that came, I think, from his relationship with the likes of Beasley and Ash. I know that when Tomas Ash died on hunger strike, they shared the adjoining cells in Mountjoy, and they were just starting their usual hunger strike in there. And if my memory is correct, I think Ash being force-fed, he was only in his 5th day or something like that when he actually got sick and died on hunger strike. So the love of the Irish language, again going back to my idea of marking houses in town, Stack taught Irish up on the Rock. And for those of you that don't know where the Rock is, that's Rock Street. That's the area of my club, which is called Austin Stacks. And right next door to Barry's shop was where he was in Deeks. And he used to hold Irish classes in there in the whole run-up to the Rising in 1916. So the tie-in with the Cúpla Focal is very close to our hearts as well. I finish up, I know my 5 minutes is up. So I'm just going to go down to my last line. I just as I said, I hope that today will be just a launching pad for what may happen in the future in regards to us remembering our TDs and our senators and our councillors as well, who put in the day-to-day graft. And I'm not saying that the TDs don't work as hard, but a lot of the lights that are shone is on the TD or the senator that's going up to Leinster House, whereas our councillors are doing the graft on behalf of the families of Kerry at the end of the day, and I think they must be congratulated and encouraged. And just to thank you all. This is my wedding anniversary today with my wife Pauline. We're 44 years married, so it's a very nice way to start our day today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eddie. And finally, representing the family of Fionn Lynch, TD for South Kerry, his granddaughter Mary Lynch.
Good morning, everybody. I'd like to thank Councillor John Joe Cullerty and members of Kerry County Council for their kind invitation here today and for staging this wonderful exhibition honouring the first Dáil and the 4 TDs who represented Kerry. I was in contact with Eoin O'Shea before coming here, and he suggested I speak about some lesser known facts about Fionn. Fionn was actually married to a woman from this parish, Bridget Slattery. They married on the 26th of November 1920. Her father, Tom Slattery, was a businessman in Rock Street, Tralee, and Fionn met Bridget through their activities, through Tom and Fionn's activities. Actually, Tom was married twice, and his first wife was Stack, so I don't know, is there any relation there? But his second wife was Brown, who was the mother of my grandmother Bridget. What might be known is Fionn had his first son, also called Fionn, in November 1920, and sadly my uncle Fionn, who I never knew, was born with epilepsy, and he was very sick all his life, and it wasn't something that they really spoke about in those days. But I always thought it must have been very hard as a young couple that they had this very sickly child, and the War of Independence and the Civil War was going on, and Fionn was regularly being taken into custody. After that, they went on to have 6 more children, and my father Kevin was the 5th born. His youngest son, Garrod, actually died earlier this year in February, but my uncle Dermot is hale and hearty and living in London, and was very insistent that I be here today. Fionn was a native Irish speaker, and it was his love of this language coupled with the people he became acquainted with while living with his aunt Mara McCarthy, who was from Waterville at 44 Mountjoy Street. And this was really his impetus for the involvement in the movement. He, along with residents of the house, which included Michael Collins, became members of the Keating branch of the Gaelic League, and the house was in fact the most raided house in Dublin during the War of Independence. Fionn later became Minister of Education with responsibility for primary education. The Education Board fired him from his teaching post in 1916, so the first thing he did was disband the Education Board. So I think he was also probably responsible for all of us agging over our Irish essays at school, and for learning Peg, and for learning Pirish Beasley's poetry, because he made it compulsory to teach through the medium of Irish for 1 hour a day in primary schools, and in a wave of patriotism he closed the primary schools for 3 months over the summer of 1922, I think it was, and all the teachers went off to learn Irish, but then they didn't realise that it was actually quite a difficult language. In later years, even though they were on opposite sides of the political divide, my auntie Sheila, who's married to Tom, Fionn's second eldest son, told me that Eamon de Valera would regularly ring the house to a Cainthos Gaeilge, and she said they'd talk at length and she could hear chuckling and laughter. So they obviously quietly got on quite well, even though they were on the opposite sides. As a young child, my mother's parents were dead, so we spent a lot of time over in visiting their home at 44 South Hill in Dartry, for Sunday lunch especially, and I remember him being very gentle and affectionate and having a large collection of children's stories which he very patiently read to myself and my brother Kevin at length. One thing I do remember, he always referred to that house as 44, and I remember him saying loudly 44, but I didn't know about 44 Mountjoy Street, so it was probably his only reference to that time, because he never spoke about the 1916 Rising, the War of Independence or the Civil War to either his children or his grandchildren. I made my Holy Communion in May 1966, and at that time he wasn't in good health, and he actually suffered. His health wasn't good all his life, and probably from all those hunger strikes. He died. The pictures that I have standing in 44 South Hill, and beside him, and he didn't look well, but he died suddenly on the 3rd of June 1966. But he'd be very chuffed to be here today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mary, and thanks to all of the relatives for sharing their memories and stories this morning. It has really served to personalise the story of the four men involved in this seminal period in our history. That concludes the formalities for this morning, even though I could sit listening to those addresses for a few more hours. We'd like to invite everybody who's here to take one of the, or a few, if you like, of the commemorative booklets, which is essentially a summary of what's on display here, which are available at the back of the room. And I'm sure there's time for photographs and a chat. We have refreshments, including mince pies, I believe, in the time of year. Tá sólagam go minic ólas agus tána bas an ócád agus tar óil seo agus gur míle maith go léir.